I'm Willow Belden, and you're listening to Oral Histories from the University of Wyoming Geological Museum. On this segment, Professor Emeritus Don Boyd tells about one of the museum's first curators, a man named Bill Reed. Interestingly, Reed was hired to run the museum even though he was not a scientist. He took over after the first curator, Wilbur Knight, died in 1903. But let's go back to the beginning. Even though he didn't have formal scientific training, Reed was something of a local hero. That's because he had discovered important dinosaur bones at Como Bluffs, north of Laramie. Reed was working for the railroad at the time, and Boyd says he discovered the fossils sort of by accident.
He was an employee, low level, of the Union Pacific, and stationed at the little, what I suppose was a siding called Como. And with time on his hands, no doubt, he wandered around, and the dinosaur bones were weathering out, eroding out of the face of Como Bluff on the side that Bill Reed was housed. So that's how, just by accident, he discovered the bones.
The discovery may have been accidental, but Reed was aware that wealthy individuals and museums out east were increasingly interested in acquiring dinosaur bones.
So he made contact with a professor at Yale, Professor Marsh, who was, you might say, in charge of the Peabody Museum at Yale. And in a sequence of events, Reed was hired to dig out and get back to Yale some dinosaur bones, quite a lot, I think.
It was at that time, while Reed was still working for Yale, that Wilbur Knight hired him at UW. Reed's job was to obtain more fossils for the university, and over time, he ended up collecting some of the most famous specimens in the collections. After Knight died of acute appendicitis, Reed took over as curator. But as we've said, he was not a scientist. He literally had no academic training in geology. And so when he attempted to create exhibits, it didn't go that well.
Reed had tried to construct dinosaur skeletons, and of course with no training in vertebrate paleontology, he built them as best he saw fit.
So did Reed just put together random bones from different dinosaurs? Was this a completely made-up creature that he assembled, essentially?
Yes, and of course one has to realize Reed had no academic credentials at all. His credentials were solely as a fossil prospector. He had seen, I'm sure, pictures of dinosaurs that had been restored in Eastern museums. So he did the best he could, we'll say.
The best he could, perhaps, but Reed's Frankenstein-esque dinosaurs didn't please his successor. Sam Knight, who became curator after Reed's death, was incensed by one skeleton in particular that Reed had put together.
Sam Knight was so unhappy with this probably rather preposterous arrangement of bones that he took it down. And the story was that this incensed all the local admirers of Reed. Reed was dead by that time, and Sam was the sole person in the department.
So if Reed had no real credentials, why did he get hired as a professor in the department?
Well, first of all, I think he probably did not hold the title of professor. I'm pretty sure his appointment was as probably instructor in geology and curator. And it was undoubtedly because of his local fame for having discovered the Como Bluff material and general collecting in the southern part of the state.
Credentials or not, Reed stayed on until his death in 1915. At that point, Sam Knight took over the museum. You can hear about Knight's tenure in the next installment of this series. For the University of Wyoming Geological Museum, I'm Willow Belden.